This is Hannibal here, part 15 of my draft book brainstorming. Yesterday, I did part 14, which was about getting signed by WWE, and this one is related to that contract that I got after getting signed by WWE, after being told by Pat Patterson that I was the best guy in the tryout that I was signed from, that numerous people went on to have WWE jobs from that tryout, most notably Ed Lee, Darren Young. There were several others. To get into it, I got signed. I was told that I would, before the contract went through, I would have to pass a drug test and a medical, and that would be done in Pittsburgh through their doctor, Dr. Joseph Maroon. The um, the medical, I was signed. I think early June. The medical wasn't until August. I had remained in contact, with them between the 2 times. Yeah, the one thing that was surprising, you always hear, "Oh, you get a WWE contract." You think that it's just gonna be a matter of, like, signing 1 paper, and it's gonna be a fast thing. The contract was so detailed, it involves, criminal record checks, background checks, uh, you need to get it notarized by an attorney. The thing is as thick as a book, so it actually takes a very long time to fill out. And again, it does have to be notarized by an attorney, and you have to sign to agree everything, so people that later can complain. For a while, when AEW first started, lots of people were trying to get out of their WWE contracts, like Mustafa Ali was one of them. Well, I bet he's probably missing that WWE contract now that he's not on the indies, but, like, you agree you agree to all the terms, and it has to be notarized by a lawyer. So people know what they're getting into when they sign with WWE. It was interesting. They're so cheap that my whole trip to Pittsburgh was done in the same day. So I had, like, the first flight out from Ottawa to Pittsburgh in the morning. I had a full day of medical tests. It included concussion testing and, like, bone testing to make sure you didn't have any injuries. And I even had to split a rental car with a guy named Kyle Rasputin, who ended up having a brief developmental career, and I think he was recently involved in some criminal case, where his girlfriend died due to him trying to choke a cab driver, and I believe he's in jail right now. Kyle Rasmussen. Um, he was just like a bodybuilder slash former football player that got signed. He had a good look to him, but there was it was clear he didn't know anything about wrestling. Nice enough guy to me at that time. But anyways, I go through the testing, it all goes well. Then they do the blood testing and everything. Everything goes great for the testing. I remember that this Kyle Rasmussen guy, um, he had some some injury that they weren't sure that he'd need surgery for or not, so we had to do an extra MRI with him, so I remember waiting around for that, but it's funny because we were wondering the whole time if he was not gonna get signed due to this injury, but he ended up getting signed. A couple of weeks later, I get a call from someone from the WWE medical offices, telling me that I have hepatitis C, and the virus is active in my system, which was quite shocking at the time because I thought I was in perfect health, and I'd actually had a hepatitis test, um, not too long before that, within a couple of years, that indicated I was not did not have anything wrong with me. I had a full regime of medical testing. So I was quite shocked by by having Hep C, to say the least, but more shocked than having this potentially deadly disease, which, by the way, the doctor said you should go to doctor in Canada and get yourself further testing right away. And I'm like, is this going to affect me getting a contract? And the doctor had mentioned that they got a no blood policy. And technically, it wouldn't, since at that time they were supposed to stop matches if accidental blood occurred, which they were legitimately doing at that time, as we've seen many times throughout WWE matches. I mean, I think they recently dropped that policy, but with very few exceptions. If you think about from 2009 to like this year, other than a few things where Brock Lesnar got blood the hard way, they've stopped matches where accidental blood has occurred. So anyways, I asked, "Is this gonna affect me getting a contract?" And they said it was a talent relations decision. So, of course, I'm really freaked out at this point. Not only I mean, I'll be honest, I was more concerned about get the contract than I was the disease at this point in time, because I had no symptoms from the disease, and, like, as I had said, I'd been working so hard to work towards this contract. And then again, if you wanna know the whole history of the disease, I mean, I'll get into it for the book itself, but I've talked about it so many times, I'm not gonna go into this much detail for it, but I'll finish the contract resentment story. So about 2 weeks after so this again, this hiring process was a long time. First of all, tryout was, like, the 1st week of May. They tell me literally 30 days later I'm signed, then I'm waiting, like, a month and a half for the medical. Then 2 weeks later, I find out I have Hep C. Then it's into September. It's into September by the time I get a call from Ty Bailey, and I remember this was one of the worst days of my life. I was kind of expecting the call to say that I wasn't gonna be hired, or I was expecting that maybe they would say, "Get treated, and then we'll hire you," or that they would help me do the treatment. But we were promoting a tour in New Brunswick, that I was gonna have Bruce be there. I was a 3-day tour in New Brunswick, and I didn't have much money at this time, and I remember I had driven to New Brunswick, which is, like, a long drive. It's like a 14 or 15-hour drive. I had postered all day in towns, and I was doing all and I'd done some radio interviews, and this is how crazy I was back then. I was gonna drive home that same day. I remember I left at night, drove all night, arrived in New Brunswick like 7 in the morning, did a radio interview, started postering the towns, did a full day of postering towns, and then drove back. So I was up for a ridiculously long amount of time, but that's just how insane I was back then, and with how poor I was, like, those are those are some of the tactics that I resorted to. We stopped going to New Brunswick after a couple I think there was 3 tours there just because of, like, what a pain of an La later tours, I tried to get people to do the posters for me, for instance, and they didn't do the posters. So, it just wasn't worth going back there, even though the first couple of times we had decent crowds, the last time was horrible. But not to digress into that, around noon so keep in mind, I had been up all night. I was about halfway done postering the second town, and postering, if you don't know what that means, is putting up hard posters in the various towns to promote the events that are coming. So it's around noon. I remember I was taking a piss in Burger King, and I get this call. I see that it's Stamford, Connecticut, the same area code. I answer it, and it's this Ty Bailey guy. He said that, unfortunately, they were gonna have to rescind their contract offer. They said and he was very careful in the wording he chose. He said this was not because he thought I was a danger issue because of their no blood policy. Said it was a licensing issue, as at this time, and I still think it's the same thing. There's about 4 or 5, um, states where you still need a wrestling license, um, to become a wrestler or to wrestle in those states. I think it's, Oklahoma is one of them, Missouri is one of them. By the way, I later did get a Missouri license after I was cured, and there's a bunch of others. Oregon is one of them. Washington is one of them. I think there's at least one more. They said it was a licensing issue because they couldn't hire me if I couldn't wrestle in all the states. So they said that was the exact reason why I was not being hired. I couldn't wrestle in the states, being Hep C positive in the states where they require licenses. So again, I still had a friggin' probably 7 hours more of putting up posters. Then I drove home. And I had to drive home, and my god, I was just that was such a depressing drive because again, I had already started planning this tour a long time ago, like, before I even was called to say that I was getting the contract, and I was thinking, "Okay, this might be my last one of the last tours I do before going to WWE," so it would have been very exciting, but but then as I'm finishing putting up the posters in these small towns in the middle of nowhere, it's like, "Man, I'm still gonna be having to do these shows," and then I'm thinking about how the hell am I gonna what am I gonna do about the Hep C, and, like, everything I've worked for was to get this job. I was still working as a bouncer and in the gym at this point in time, and, oh, I was also I was working at a group home too. Which I later ended up losing my group home job due to having Hep C. So it didn't just affect me in wrestling, affected me in my everyday life, which really sucks. So anyway, I get home, it's not too long out in Canada, it's kinda slow to get a doctor appointment. Within that same September, I got a doctor's appointment who confirmed that the virus was active in my system, and they started a plan to get me on the standard treatment, which was interferon and ribavirin. It was gonna be a 6-month plan. That was covered by the government, that treatment. It's a chemotherapy-like treatment. It has a lot of side effects. Just for the record, this was in 2009. We are now 2024. There's way better treatments available. If you have Hep C, I mean, Billy Graham took the newest treatment before he died and got cured. Billy Jack Haynes took it. Jacques Rougeau took it. And keep in mind, Billy Graham and Jacques Rougeau also had a lot of matches with Abdullah the Butcher. I don't know if Billy Jack Haynes ever did or not, but let's just say there was a lot of stuff going around. So again, okay, so 2009, um, we basically narrowed it down to there was a match with Abdullah the Butcher. One of the ways of transmitting Hep C is sharing razor blades. And Abdullah the Butcher had cut me with a razor blade he had used on himself in a match. And at this point, from the records we ended up getting, he had known he had had Hep C for at least 10 years by this point. And for the people that wonder, like, why haven't, more people come out? Well, it's not good for you to come out to say you have Hep C. Bob Orton Jr. had it. Bobby Jaggers died from it. Ivan Koloff had it. Bushwhacker Luke told me at one point he had it. Apparently, I've heard through the grapevine at one point Invader had it, the guy that killed Brody. Don't quote me on that. That was a rumor. Um, I know Luke got cured of it as well. Anyways, uh, by having it and just bleeding outwardly, like say you have 2 people bleeding in a regular match from small cuts and the blood flowing outward, the chances are way less than if you cut yourself and put a razor blade into your system, get your blood directly on it, then cut somebody else with it without their permission on top of that. So It's basically assault, and it was, basically what he was found guilty of when it went to court was negligence, assault, and battery. Negligence because he knew he had Hep C, and it doesn't take a brain surgeon to know if you have Hep C and you cut someone with a blade with blood on it, you're probably gonna infect them. Assault because he did not have my permission to cut me, and battery, it caused bodily harm. Okay, so that's what he was found guilty of. He wasn't found guilty of transmitting it to me because there's no way of exactly proving that, but he was negligent knowing that he had it and cutting me anyways. So it was my ex-wife who had her law degree and also an ethics degree that encouraged me to go to court with Abdullah on this. Originally, he was saying that he didn't have it, which was a complete lie. Just like him alleging that he couldn't read is a lie. A guy that's been traveling in airports by himself most of his career for literally decades, reading menus, operating a business. He had a successful restaurant business for decades. So we won in Canada, and unfortunately, it took 2 years to get the lawsuit endorsed in the US. During that 2 years, he moved some properties around, sold some properties, shut down his business, which is actually called fraudulent conveyance. And up to this day, he has avoided paying anything. That lawsuit related to negligence, assault, and battery, he hasn't paid anything related to that lawsuit. As far as the first treatment, I did 19 out of 24 weeks, and in January of being on that I did respond well. I was testing negative during the treatment, but on the 19th week, the treatment here's the one problem I had with the first treatment. I still tried to work, and I was still working out and doing MMA training during the treatment, which was not good. I should have been resting, and I think that has a reason why it didn't work, but I ended up one day when I was trying to work out well on treatment, I basically had a mini stroke, and it was terrible. So, my doctor said at that point in time that the side effects of the treatment were worth it worse than Hep C at the time, and he thought that after 6 months, I would be very likely to be cured since for that almost the whole 19 weeks, I had been cleared of the disease, so he felt comfortable taking me off after 19 weeks. So I get off the treatment again. I was signed at 26, so I would have been 27 at this time while on treatment. Still young enough to compete in MMA with a bit of a martial arts and quite a good amateur wrestling background, so I started training heavily in MMA during this time with a guy called Tag Atkinson, another guy named Nabil Khatib, and a bunch of different people, and I was going to fight, at the casino in Gatineau that August. So I remember you're not declared cured unless you stop doing the treatment for 6 months and you're tested and it's still gone because you can test when you're on the treatment and test negative. If you test 6 months after the treatment and you're still negative, they declare you cured. So I would have been able to get licensed to fight MMA. So my whole theory was that I was gonna get cleared, and then I was gonna have an MMA fight, then I was gonna send the MMA fight to WWE and say, "Hey, look, I got licensed to fight MMA. Will you give me another shot?" Alright, so this is another one of my worst days of my life. This was worse than even finding out I had Hep C. So it's July 2010 at this point. I walk into the doctor's office. I'm so happy because I've been training in MMA. I'm literally in awesome shape at this point, and I'll even try and find a picture for you guys. I'm literally in one of my best shapes I've ever been at this point. I'm very well trained in grappling. I have a fight booked at the Hull Casino for that August, and I'm thinking my plan is gonna come to fruition. I'll send you a picture. This was actually a picture taken. This picture right here was a promo. This picture was used on the poster for that MMA show. So you can see I'd recovered and like I was in really good shape as far as being ready to fight. And I was really looking forward to it. So I go into the doctor's office and the doctor says, Devin, I'm really sorry, but the hepatitis C is back. And because you had such horrible side effects, I'm gonna wait. I don't feel comfortable doing another round of that same treatment. We're gonna hold off for about 8 years to get you on a new treatment. So that just destroyed me because it's like at this point, I'm still doing jobs that I don't really like other than the gym job. I like the job at the group home, I hate it, and I ended up getting laid off from it anyways, which I'll tell the story of in a second. Uh, this was like crushing for my dream and my plans. I couldn't fight MMA, I couldn't wrestle. Um, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was devastated because it holds everything back, and it was just brutal. So I was in a very deep depression for quite a while. At this point in time, Global TV in Canada, which is the third national network of Canada, did a documentary on me that aired across Canada. It ended up airing 3 times across Canada. It's called Blood Feud. Maclean's magazine, which is a big magazine, did a story on the situation. The Atlantic, a US magazine story. All the local papers here covered it. It was a very famous story. There ended up being a movie that won 3 awards, the LA Movie Awards, called This Is Hannibal, about the whole situation. So and another movie called Don't Bleed on Me. And again, I mentioned here's how I got in contact with Billy Graham. Um, at some point during this time, I got another lawyer, and there was, I guess this lawyer that took over the Abdullah case also discovered that it was against human rights to discriminate against an athlete based on Hep C. So there was a lawsuit filed in relation to WWE at that time, where there was a settlement in that case that's undisclosed that, I'm not gonna talk about, but, basically the settlement allowed me to take a new treatment that wasn't covered by the government, and what happened was, I got in contact with Billy Graham, who I knew had Hep C, to be included in one of the documentaries, and of course, Billy Graham had seen Abdullah assault wrestlers without permission many times, including one time taping a razor blade to a popsicle stick and cutting up a Native American wrestler who was barely paid anything for that match, I think $15, ended up being taken to the hospital. So, through my friendship with Billy Graham, as I said, they weren't our medical system sucks in a lot of ways. It's helped me sometimes, but overall, it sucks. So he got me an appointment with his doctor, who is one of the top liver specialists in the US. Dr. Hector Rodriguez used to be involved with the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, and he's the one that did, Billy's liver transplant. He had to get a new liver due to Hep C, and this doctor put me on a new or he suggested this new treatment called Incivek triple therapy to me, which was interferon and ribavirin, the same 2 drugs I was on before, but an increased dose of ribavirin and this 3rd drug added called Incivek. This was an experimental treatment that never ended up getting approved because the side effects were too bad. Never ended up getting approved to, uh, to be used, by regular people. They were able to get me to take it as an experimental treatment in Canada, but it wouldn't be covered. So this treatment was 36 weeks. So this was a horrible treatment, terrible side effect, bug under the skin type itching to the point where I actually had to go to the hospital once because I was gonna kill myself because the itching would not stop. The itching went from mild itching to bug under the skin type itching, and this itching was even on my dick and in the butt area. It was all over the place. So if you can imagine having continuous itching, like, it was horrible, and not only the itching, but there was a sleep aspect that you couldn't sleep on this medication, so just try without all the other side effects to stay awake for weeks on end and see how good you feel. It was terrible, and there was side effects from the treatment that actually caused depression. This time I continued work. Oh, by the way, when all these documentaries started to come out, that's when I got laid off from my group home job, which at the time they said if I got cured, they'd hire me back. They did. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this. Ty Bailey at the time, when they called me, to tell me I was released, did say that if I ever got cured, they would take another look at me. They said at that time the door would be open. Anyways, it was uh it was horrible. Thank you to my ex-wife for getting me through it. I couldn't have done it without her. I'm sorry for everything that happened between us. I really am sorry from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to my parents for helping me get through it. I did end up getting through the 36 weeks of treatment. I had to go on leave from my regular job. I lost my group home job. And then at one point, I lost my regular job and had to go to arbitration to get it back. And in between that time, I had to do even crappier job. But the main thing is by 2013, I was declared cured of Hep C. So I did manage to get cured of Hep C through this Incivek triple therapy. Billy Graham, WWE Hall of Fame former world champion Billy Graham, helped me through the whole treatment. I couldn't have done it without him either. I'm forever in debt to him for putting me on this treatment and then talking to me every day through the treatment, being my best other than my ex-wife, at this time, Billy Graham was my best friend. He talked to me every single day through the treatment, so I'll be in debt to him for the rest of my life, and he may have had a grumpy side, and he may have got the short end of the stick in wrestling, because when he was champion, the biggest, you get his main event in Madison Square Garden was $5,000. Royalties were a lot different. So anyways, he had a right to be bitter towards the end, but he was always nice to me. I mean, he was grumpy to me a few times, as anyone's gonna be. His friends are gonna have their disagreements from time to time, but uh, from, like, 2011 to the time of his death last year, he was one of my best friends and a mentor to me, and I'm sure he'll come up a few more times in this draft book, but he was like a grandfather figure to me. And at one point during this treatment, I went on an interview trip, and I actually drove to Phoenix and hung out with him, and that was probably if you wanna say there was one highlight of my Hep C treatment. It was driving out to see Billy Graham for a few days. It was business related. And also I helped him at a WrestleCon while I was on Hep C treatment. That's when I actually arranged for him to have his last ever meeting with Hulk Hogan, who at one time he was a mentor to Hulk Hogan as well. And by the way, Hulk Hogan had seen my one of my documentaries, Don't Bleed on Me, and he had commented on it publicly. He had made a tweet about it. So yeah, Hep C was brutal. It affected me financially, physically, emotionally. I did end up getting another WWE tryout, which I'll actually share the video of the tryout, I think, right now to close this off rather than retell the story because I did explain the story fairly well, but they did WWE did try and get me a tryout later on, and sadly, sadly, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. But let's show this now.
So what happened in 2014? You had a tryout in Iowa. What was that like?
It was a tryout to get a tryout in NXT, and it was Gerald Briscoe and Jim Ross that were scouting that tryout on behalf of the WWE, and they told me out of that tryout that they were going to recommend me to WWE. Particularly, Gerald Briscoe told me this, and he told me I'd be hearing back that September if I was accepted or not. But he personally was going to put me through for an NXT tryout. I never heard back. And yeah, that was the year after that, that was July 2014, July 2000 or August 2015. Ric Flair attended a Harley race camp that I was at, and he was attending for a day on behalf of the WWE. And I did that tryout. There was only 2 matches. I was in one of those 2 matches. And he said at the end of that seminar that he was going to recommend 4 people to the WWE. And I talked to him later that night at the event that Harley Race put on. And I asked him just his advice. And he told me in that conversation that I was going to be one of the 4 people that he recommends. But again, I didn't hear anything back. So unfortunately, nothing came out of those recommendations.
And then you end up having one more tryout this year in 2016.
No, I was supposed to actually have a tryout actually in NXT, paid travel and everything. What happened there was Billy Graham, he's back under a Legends contract now, and he's been telling me all along to stay pushing at WWE. And he got me Gerald Briscoe's cell phone number. And of course, as I just mentioned, Gerald Briscoe told me he was going to recommend me for a tryout in 2014. So Billy said, just call him up and ask whatever happened with that tryout, and offer to send him something new, see if you can get another tryout. And I called him up and reminded him of who I was, sent him some new material, and he said he was going to recommend me for this tryout this past May 2016. Sent him my medical papers and everything. Was later told that I was accepted into the NXT tryout, was given my itinerary and everything for the tryout. And then just over a week before the tryout, I received an email on a Sunday night from WWE Talent Relations indicating to me that they're sorry for the confusion, but I'm no longer invited to the tryout. And I received no information other than that, why I was no longer invited after being accepted into the tryout. And I recently saw Gerald Briscoe again in person just last month, and I asked him about what happened. And he said all he does is give the recommendations. And he said he was actually happy when he found out that I was in the tryout. And he has no idea why it was rescinded. It wasn't even rescinded. I was just uninvited, I guess is the word. So he doesn't know. And yeah, he said he feels for me on that one. And I believe he's telling the truth. He has no reason to lie to me. So I don't know what happened. Only the WWE office knows, whoever made that decision, someone higher up in the rankings than Gerald Briscoe, who coincidentally, we were just talking about Brock Lesnar. He was the one that discovered Brock Lesnar. So the guy that, first of all, when I was originally hired, Pat Patterson was the main person out of the tryout camp that I was hired from who recommended me. He's a very well-respected agent in WWE. Then I had Gerald Briscoe recommend me. And those two guys can't help me get in. Plus, Billy Graham also gave a recommendation to me. Those are some pretty top people in the wrestling business. Supposedly Ric Flair, unless Ric Flair's lying to me, which of course, why would he? I'm nobody to him. He supposedly recommended me too. So I don't know how much better recommendations you can get than those.